welcome to AWS Reinforce. I hope you're getting a good start. Maybe hit some happy hours last night or had 3 myself. It's been a busy start already. But welcome again, and thanks for joining the GRC track for a close look at compliance with AWS Cloud Audit Academy. So, my name is Paul Hong, and I'm an AWS Security Assurance Manager, and pretty much we deal with everything from a security and compliance perspective for security of the cloud. So our global infrastructure, our data centers, regions all over the world, we manage those audits. We physically go to those data centers and we test all the different controls with our auditors, as well as our logical security across many different frameworks that you might be familiar with, right? NIST, SOC, ISO, PCI, all of the above, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But today, we'll start with some expectations and assumptions. It is a lightning talk, so we'll move pretty quickly through this. But first off, this is geared towards those in security and compliance roles. So I assume some of you are dealing with security and compliance on a daily basis, whether as someone who manages audits or does your own internal assessments or prepares your systems for those assessments. The use cases we'll be using might be industry specific, but the applicability of Cloud Audit Academy and these examples are actually going to be applicable across the board because we talk about the core services, and these are the same core security services that we think about when we talk about security within an AWS cloud environment, as well as compliance with all those common frameworks that I mentioned. And then thirdly, we're going to just take a quick glimpse into Cloud Audit Academy. It is actually much, much more in-depth. Definitely not something we can cover in 20 minutes, but we'll do an example module to kind of talk through what that looks like. All right, so quick look at the agenda. We have an overview. We'll talk a little bit to set the stage on what are those compliance challenges, audit challenges, because you're in a cloud environment. Shared responsibility model, I'm sure many of you have already heard about that, but we'll just use that to provide a little context. Then we'll talk about inheritance of security and compliance through AWS and our cloud infrastructure. And then we'll jump into Cloud Audit Academy, give a quick overview of what that is, and then talk through a module. All right, so what are those cloud compliance challenges that you have? I know for many, audit, compliance, these things can be a headache. That might not be your full-time job, but something you need to consider, right? Especially with the increasing regulation across many industries and all the differing frameworks. The goal of Cloud Audit Academy is really to help consolidate that so that we can provide a common solution, or at least a common approach to finding a solution for compliance within AWS. And so first off, we think about control framework, language, requirements. Those who are making the regulations, many times they don't have that in-depth knowledge of cloud security and the architecture behind it and how we prove out that security, right? So they might be using very old means for creating compliance or audits, asking for thousands of screenshots when it doesn't really make sense for a cloud environment. So that's the first challenge that we're going to talk about. 2, GRC teams might be uncertain about the different compliance requirements and how their responsibilities differ from AWS or another cloud service provider, right? So when we think about security of the cloud, there's lots that you can inherit from AWS, and I'll touch on the different audits that we cover. But when it comes to into the cloud, that's one of the biggest risks is misconfiguration when it is on behalf of the customer to make sure they're configuring it for security and for compliance. And then number 3, just along with the shared responsibility model, right? I think we're all aware or have at least seen it, but it can also differ service to service on what that level of responsibility is, and sometimes that's not always clearly understood by our customers. So those are just at a very high level, quickly saying these are some of the common challenges that we see from our customers, and again, we hope through our educational programs to help bridge that gap. All right, so again, just a quick view at the customer responsibility matrix, or the shared responsibility model. On the top, blue, customer, that's when we say security in the cloud. That's what we mean in the cloud, right? In the workloads that our customers operate. And then the orange at the bottom, AWS, That's going to be security of the cloud. Again, we talked about our global infrastructure, the different compute, storage, database services that we provide. But that's going to be all on the security of the cloud, the cloud service provider responsibilities. Again, if you need more information, there's tons and tons of literature on this, so I won't dive too deep. And then I like this slide because it gives just a small glimpse into the different third-party audits, certifications, attestations that we go through. You can see ISO, SOC, FedRAMP, FISMA, FIPS, PCI, C5. The list goes on and on and on. And we go through these audits on a periodic basis, some multiple times a year. Like SOC, we do quarterly cycles for testing, and we release those reports on AWS Artifact that is publicly available for our customers via NDA for the most part, but you can get those on AWS Artifact. And this is our bread and butter when it comes to security and compliance, our AWS security assurance teams. We manage over 143 different audits each year across all regions, industries, countries, regulators, in many, many different forms and fashions. So we are experts in what we do when it comes to this perspective and providing that security and compliance for our customers and allowing them to inherit our controls. If you think about physical access to our data centers, right? A lot of the different controls that we offer are packaged up and delivered through our audits and provide that assurance to our customers. All right, so what is Cloud Audit Academy? So we'll talk through this now. I'll give a quick overview. So Cloud Audit Academy is our training program, again, to help educate our customers on how they can use AWS to meet their security and compliance needs and prove out security. So actually going through the management console for those core services and helping them to understand what pieces of evidence and what automation they can use through services like Systems Manager and Audit Manager and AWS Config. All these that we cover will actually talk through them conceptually and then also demo each of those environments to talk about those different capabilities that those services have. And then we've got 3 different versions. So we've got our 101 version. That's the easiest one, free of charge, self-paced. It's about 2 to 3 hours, but that's just if you want to get your feet wet on the considerations from an audit and compliance perspective when you're moving from on-prem to the cloud or if you're in a fully cloud-based environment. And it's cloud agnostic, so very easy to take. There's a self-based or a self-paced training as well as a instructor-led training as well. So those options, I'll provide information on how to look into that further at the end. We've got our 201 version. That's AWS specific. So it's not industry agnostic, but it does take in a lot of those common frameworks, PCI, ISO, SOC, NIST, and compiles them and pulls out those core compliance requirements that every organization is going to need to go through. And we package it up, and it's a very big deep dive, almost 2 to 3 days of content, instructor-led training that's available for our customers. And then our 301 version is the industry or framework-specific one. We've got one for NIST and PCI so far, and we're continuing to build them out. But that is another one that is 2 days, full-length, instructor-led trainings that provides all those sort of details from an industry perspective on how our customers can apply those compliance practices within AWS. And so, of course, we don't have time to go through a full module, but I wanted to just give you a glimpse on the format and what it looks like. So this is going to be an example from our NIST-based version. There's 6 modules you can see based on many of the common security domains that you're aware of. This is based on the NIST control families. Today we'll look at just number 3, so audit accountability and incident response. So that's the AU and IR control domain family for NIST. And just to give you a layout of what that looks like. So pretty much what we do is we cover every requirement in a framework. And so for this example, we've got 3.6.1 for incident response planning. And there's 4 main categories that we cover for every single one of these requirements. So first, we talk about what that requirement is and what it means. Very simple. The second step is app applicability to AWS. So what are those services that are going to help you meet that requirement from a security compliance perspective? 3, a test plan. So this is just an example steps that your auditors or you as someone internally auditing or preparing for assessment can use in order to test your compliance level, your capabilities. And this is a guide to help you get through that. And then number 4 is best practices. That helps to summarize the main points of the module, as well as provide some more specific implementation details on how you can use those services discussed to prove out your security. All right, so we'll quickly go through one for, again, requirement 3.6.1. That's our incident response planning. So as you can see here, establish operational incident handling capability. This translates to anyone's incident response program, right? Every program or every organization needs to have some sort of program in place. And this can consist of an incident response plan. So we think about every step from preparation, detection, analysis, containment, recovery, through to your user response activities, remediation, right, closure of your potential incident. That's going to be all covered within this requirement. So it is a pretty heavy one when we think about the different layers that are required to meet this. It's going to be your end-to-end incident response program. And then when we think about step 2, this is really the core of our course. But it'll talk about some of the core security services when it comes to AWS. And so we start with logging and monitoring on the left, moving over to the alerting aggregation. But you can see everything from AWS CloudTrail, which is our API logging service. It allows you to track any sort of actions occurring within your AWS environment for triage, in case you need to go back and identify what actions led to a potential security incident. You see, we've got Amazon Guard Duty. That's our threat detection service using machine learning and some of industry best sources for identifying different malware as well as anomalous activity that produces findings that if you enable within your environments will allow you to get insight into those, the sources, the IP sources, where those, the location of the attacks are coming from, what the recommended steps are to remediate, as well as next steps to close out and follow up on those incident response procedures. And then we've got AWS Config, which is an awesome auditing tool. It allows for continuous compliance, continuous auditing, and it's a rules-based service that allows you to use AWS managed rules or your own custom rules to set and configure on your resources within AWS. So for example, if you wanted to make sure all your S3 buckets have service-side encryption enabled, you can set a rule to make sure that if one goes out of compliance, then that rule will be in a non-compliant status. And you can actually drill down into that rule, identify which S3 buckets within your environment are causing it to be non-compliant, and then get the next steps to identify how do we remediate. And that could be through automation, it could be through manually investigating, but that's just one example that you can scale out your environment and have continuous compliance as you go through your dashboard for config, and it provides you one thing that many companies have problems with is an inventory of your resources that allows you to have insight into that AWS account and what is your compliance, your configuration management status for many of those resources. So great, 3 great products when we talk about from a logging monitoring perspective to start out your incident response programs in your AWS environments. Then we move over to alerting and aggregation. And first with Amazon CloudWatch, you can use that for alerting. So you can actually configure it to alert based on something like Amazon Guard Duty and allow it to trigger any sort of alerts when a finding occurs when you're within your Guard Duty console. And then you can have CloudWatch integrate with Amazon SNS, which is our simple notification service, to then send alerts to those in your incident response team via email, text, phone call, whatever configuration you want to basically alert anyone for manual follow-up. And then we've got AWS Security Hub, which is our aggregation tool, another very powerful tool that integrates and consolidates your logs from your different security services, whether it's Amazon Guard Duty, Amazon Inspector, our vulnerability management tool, or even third-party partners you can integrate into AWS Security Hub. On top of that, we also do benchmark checks with sources like CIS or AWS's own best practices based on all of our many years of threat intel that we've identified through our cloud environment. So that's just a quick rundown of some of the services that we would cover in this example module. And once we cover the conceptual piece, we then have experts go through the management console, talk through each of the different tabs, the main functionality of that service, and then example artifacts or evidence within the management console that you can prove out to your auditors in order to show your compliance within the cloud environment. So that's the big piece when it comes to this is everyone wants to know about the services, right, and where to look and how to evidence to make that audit process a little easier, a little smoother, and that's what we hope to share as we go through this course. All right. And this is the test plan I mentioned. This is the step 3, where pretty much we would give a high-level steps for someone to assess their own environments based on the requirement for that module. And as you can see here, just 1 to 4, inspect that IRP, that incident response plan, go in, make sure that they're calling out the right services, the AWS services, or any tools that you're using in your incident response program, that you are properly describing and including that from a holistic perspective, not only for cloud, but also your on-prem environments as well. You want to make sure that's all integrating, right? And then number 3, understand that architecture usage of those AWS services. And number 4, actually inspect that those configurations match your incident response plan. Things are actually functioning as you are documenting it within your policies and procedures, et cetera. So end-to-end, how do we assess that incident response plan? How do we assess our environment? How do we make sure that our services are configured to actually go from step A all the way through remediation for an incident response? All right, and then step 4, this is, again, I won't go through all of these, but it really just provides some of those best practices that, one, we cover during the module, as well as a little more examples and different services, functionality that you can use to dive deeper into how you can provide compliance for your organization and to prove out with your auditors. All right. Sorry, if you want to take a picture. Go ahead. Okay. All right, and then let's see. So now just want to give you some takeaways when it comes to how you can register. This one is just some interactive walkthroughs, some simulations of the management console that we've pulled together based on the services that we cover in each module. This will give you access to all 6 modules and AWS Skill Builder, which is also an awesome site for getting free training. You will need to sign in or create an account, but then you have access to tons and tons of different educational materials. And so I'll give you a second to take a picture if you need. And then lastly, this is just the final QR code to get more information on the different versions of the course that I talked about. Understand how you can sign up and get more information. And of course, I'll take any questions afterwards, but I know I'm out on time. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Reinforce.